My name is Jeff Marsh. I'm the director of the MERC Isotope Geochemistry Laboratory. I've been with the Metal Earth Project for 3.5 years, and I run all the instrumentation and lab facilities that we use for the Metal Earth Project. I'm a geologist, did my bachelor's degree at the University of California, PhD at the University of Maine in geology, and was an assistant professor for 4 years in New York. An SEM is a scanning electron microscope. It uses an electron beam that's generated from a tungsten filament and focused down onto a sample surface to generate X-rays and reflected electrons. They can pick up on all sorts of characteristics. You can tell what type of mineral the sample contains. You can do imaging at very high magnification and high resolution to see all sorts of very small scale features within the rock sample. And you can do all sorts of other types of chemical and textural analysis of the sample that you ordinarily wouldn't be able to do just using a normal light microscope. It's a fundamental instrument in earth sciences because you need to be able to look at that very small scale to understand your rock sample in enough detail that you can then move on to the next stages of analytical work. So for example, isotope geochemistry or other types of petrological analysis. Aside from the geophysicists, pretty much every student, postdoc, and prof in the Metal Earth Project utilizes this instrument. The calendar is booked 7 days a week. It gets used overnight because we can automate much of the functionality. We can operate it remotely. So someone is using this machine almost all the time, and it serves many purposes. We wouldn't be able to do much of the Metal Earth research without it. It's a cool thing when you're dealing with a large project like this, then you can address a lot more research questions. The other facility is a laser ablation ICP-MS laboratory. So it's essentially two instruments that are coupled together. What we're looking at here is a garnet crystal from a mafic rock that is surrounded by a fine-grained intergrowth of amphibole and plagioclase. So potentially a person would want to see what the chemical exchange was between the host garnet crystal and the reaction product. This machine here, the scanning electron microscope, shows you mineral relationships and the general chemical composition in terms of major element composition of minerals and rocks, whereas the laser ablation ICP-MS gives you all the information that this machine is not sensitive enough to detect. So the other thing I'm doing right now is I'm ramping up the carrier gases, and then those will be slowly ramped up over 2 minutes. And then at that point, we'll be able to start ablating our material, and that will be sent to 2 mass spectrometers. One is the Neptune multi-collector that would analyze the uranium lead isotopes, not in these minerals, but in most of the other work that we do that are uranium-bearing minerals. And then also the trace element composition would be measured on the other mass spectrometer, the ICAP. The laser ablation part of it is basically the sampling method. So you have a rock sample or mineral separates that you would put into the sample cell, and then ultraviolet laser beam is focused down on the sample surface and actually breaks up the very small area that it targeted onto into a very fine aerosol, which is carried in helium gas through tubing into an ICP-MS instrument, which is an inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometer. Once that aerosol of particles from your sample that have been generated from the laser ablation part enters the ICP-MS instrument, it enters an extremely hot plasma, which is a superheated argon gas. It's about 7,000 degrees centigrade. All the little particles of rock sample that were blasted by the laser get ionized into individual atoms with a positive charge. They get accelerated into the mass spectrometer where they're focused into a very fine ion beam and then separated based on their mass to charge ratio. And then at the very back end of that, there's a detector, or in case of one of our machines, 9 detectors that then detect the essentially intensity of the ion beam which is then converted into either a concentration or an isotopic ratio or an age, a timing of formation, based on the comparison of your unknown sample with the reference materials that we also analyzed during the same session. We have set up a sequence within the LA-ICP-MS system where we analyze our known reference materials that have a known concentration or known age, and then we analyze the unknown materials that are the samples from our research projects. That's feldspar. The stuff that's sort of pale green is amphibole. You can sort of barely see the laser path in the reflected light view. After we collect all the data, we basically process it in some fancy computer software that recalculates everything and gives you either the concentration of whatever element you're interested in, or like I said, ratios, ages, things like that, that tell you all sorts of information about how certain parts of Earth's crust formed, what the composition of a certain mineral is, like on a very fine scale, so like parts per billion sort of level of detection. So very, very low concentrations. So if you needed to know how much gold is in your pyrite or some other iron sulfide mineral, this machine probably wouldn't be able to tell you that because it's probably in the parts per million or maybe even parts per billion level. But the LA-ICP-MS would be able to detect that down to parts per billion, even though that sounds like a very, very small amount. It is a small amount, but if you have a lot of that pyrite mineral, very large volumes of it, and it is incorporating, let's say tens or hundreds of parts per million gold, well, then that can actually be enough to be significant for, research or even exploration purposes. There's no real limit as to how you could apply that data to many other research questions that could span, different continents, or maybe process-oriented things like, why do we see this process in Western Ontario, but we don't see it in Eastern Ontario? With the Metal Earth Project, we're spanning like the entire scale of, nanoscale analysis with province scale comparisons and ways of just contrasting data with data sets from each other. I do get to spend a lot of time thinking about, new ways to approach a research question and utilize our instruments to their maximum potential, which is, often very satisfying. We try to innovate as much as possible as well. So basically we have a lot of state-of-the-art instrumentation here that we built as part of the Metal Earth Project. And a lot of it is allowing us to do things that most labs are not doing yet. One example is the mineral xenoteam, which is often found in hydrothermal rock types and ore deposits. And that type of geochronology has been done before, but not at the very small scales that we're doing in our lab, because we have a very high precision instrument, mass spectrometer, that allows us to use very small spots to analyze very small grains. And so people are finding maybe only 5 or 10 grains in a particular sample, and they're all very small. And so we are able to analyze them just within the rock thin section and give them a date that enables them to understand the timing of hydrothermal activity and ore deposit formation, whereas most other of the more common mineral chronometers would not give you that type of information. So that's one thing that we have been doing recently and are doing much more of now, and want to really pioneer that methodology and share it with the rest of the world. People often come to me, students and early career researchers, more often than not, come to me and they say, this is the research question that I'm trying to address. What type of method should I use? I'm involved with a lot of students and getting them moving in the right direction with their projects, and so that's really great to do.